Okay, let's get started. Turn the music down. Thanks for joining this block today. Hope everyone's having a good Authenticate. Mindy, you can leave that open, let people filter in. So I think we'll get some latecomers since we're just coming out of break. So a lot of talk in the keynote sessions and throughout about passkey adoption. You know, when you see something like 800 million Google users and 175 million Amazon users using passkeys, those are really awesome numbers, and talk about the potential of passkeys for consumers. But we also know, of course, that passkeys are critical and have seen a lot of historical and ongoing traction in the enterprise. So these three sessions will take a closer look at enterprise adoption trends and requirements for passkeys and for FIDO authentication. As a reminder, please log in or add this session to your schedule, ask questions through the app, and give feedback on each session in the app also after the end of each session. So to kick things off today, I'd like to welcome to the stage Johannes Stockman from Okta, who is, by the way, here, not at Octane. So Johannes, thank you for voting with your feet. He's going to talk about securing the enterprise. So Johannes, please come to stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone. So yes, I'm Authenticators, Zero Trust, and I want to talk about phishing resistance, passkeys, and Zero Trust. Who watched the FIDO feud yesterday? Quite a few. So apparently, Zero Trust is one of the IAM trends that everyone's tired of. So I'm happy that some people of you showed up at all. But yeah, at the end, I think the FIDO came in second, so the question might have been misunderstood. I have to put this in. There are some forward-looking statements, has nothing to do, or don't take it as the roadmap for the company I'm working for, not the roadmap for anyone else. There's also some statistics on it. They're normalized, so it shouldn't give you any details about our growth in general. And that's the agenda. So on a high level, I want to start about phishing resistance, why it's important and how you get there. Then compare that to Zero Trust and how that actually relates to FIDO credentials. And then I want to look ahead a little bit. So let's get started. How do you become phishing resistant? I'll have the obligatory slide here, why you should, or why phishing resistance is important. I'll go really quick. Most breaches, they are somehow involving stolen credentials. Passwords are especially easy to steal. Then you put social engineering on top of that, gets even a higher success rate. And again, while you can social engineer pretty much anything, it's a lot harder if you have asymmetric credentials, which are harder to steal. And lastly, breaches are really expensive, and there is a financial impact that you have directly, but there's also really an impact to your brand that's generally underestimated. Now, I want to talk a little bit about where we're at, and I took those numbers from my favorite IDP. It's just the easiest to get it from there for me. And in the last 2 years, pretty much since we have passkeys, we have seen like 599% growth of phishing-resistant factor validations. Should correct that, so it's actually factor validations. That's pretty much more than 2.5 times growth year over year. And that's great, but we also started at a fairly low baseline. Now, what that actually means is that around 8% of all factor validations are phishing resistant. If you put that in comparison, there's still around 50% usage of passwords. SMS and push are around 10%. So there's still a good way to grow, but still, we're slowly getting there. And it's kind of a glass half full situation because if you look at an authentication, there are several factor validations. If one of them is phishing resistant, then so is the whole authentication. So the total number is actually better. And yeah, that number is slightly above zero. That's customers that actually went completely, or organizations that went completely passwordless. And the main message here is it's actually doable. Some companies did it, but that number being that small, it's way too hard. So we have to work on that. Now I want to talk about a little bit how can you get started now, right? Assuming you didn't adopt any phishing-resistant authenticators yet. The first thing, Son, you have heard that also in the consumer space. It's actually just provided as an alternative, right? Get started through that. You have a better user experience. You have a much better security. And similar to passwords, right? If you have password as a first factor, now you're using a passkey as a first factor, you might still need step up. But what you're getting if you're using a phishing-resistant factor as the first factor, you're already avoiding a lot of attacks, even if you use still password later on, because you're saying you want to step up, and because it's a syncable passkey. All the malicious website, right, you go to the wrong origin, password-related attacks, push bombing, none of that is possible if it's the second factor, right? Because you have to get a handle to the passkey first. And also sharing a passkey is a lot, while it's doable, or possible and should be possible, it's not as easy as sharing a password. And with that, you get good learnings and initial adoption, and you can use that to actually roll out future features. Now, what does it actually take towards going towards comprehensive phishing resistance, right, which would be end-to-end and probably passwordless? Now, the direct impact of a breach is a very good motivator. It's generally too late, and you don't want your CISO or worse, your shareholders tell you you have to do it now. Then you generally have to rush it, and it's harder. And also, we already heard that before, you don't want to wait for the perfect solution, right? It's still a developing ecosystem. So it's just starting replacing passwords where it's easy, using phishing-resistant factors there, and then use that to gradually eliminate passwords is the right way to go. So you can make them the exception, passwords the exception, before you make phishing resistance the rule. And then you should probably accept that there's a short-term cost to it. That could be financially, right? It could be that you're buying security keys for a subset of users or all of your users. It could also be from productivity, right? If you have tools that don't support modern auth, you might want to replace them with different tooling or use your buying power to force some modernization. And all in all, it's generally easier and quicker than recovering from a breach. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Zero Trust, as I said. Really quick, I want to go over the principles. First one, it's always verify. It's pretty clear. You don't want to give access without knowing who it is, but you also want to keep verifying, right? You don't want to have long-standing access without re-verification. You have to assume breach, which pretty much means you have to assume that somebody is already in your network. That could be a malicious actor, could even be an insider. It also means that it's more focused towards FIDO. That could be a hostile endpoint, right? You're running on a device with malware. And one thing you have to do there is you have to continuously monitor for anomalies. And then lastly, you have to limit impact. So you're assuming breach, which means it already happened or is going to happen. So can you make sure that the damage that is done is limited? It's obviously least privilege. You shouldn't have users or give users more access than they need. And you should isolate, right? You shouldn't have users that have access to everything. And then very important is an incident response and recovery. You have to have a plan, right? How do you recover? And you actually have to practice it. Now, how do those three principles relate to FIDO? So WebAuthn is great on initial authentication, right? You get strong authentication, phishing resistance, you have multi-factor in most cases. So with that, you really are good on always verify at the beginning. Once you do that, right, you issue a session token. And Matt already mentioned that at the keynote. Once you issue that session token, because you can't on every API access do a step up, right? You have that session token, now those are vulnerable to get stolen. You also get some limited signals about the environment. It's really important to restrict access to approved machines for high assurance, right? FIDO can help to some extent with enterprise attestation there, but it's still a little hard to roll out and lacking in some cases, because if I have a security key, right, I get strong authentication, but if I plug that in a public computer, that machine then has access to a lot of my data. If I use enterprise attestation, I know what the security key is. I'm not necessarily sure what the device is. And then also important, what am I actually verifying, right? How much proof of possession am I getting when I think of syncable passkeys? Is it the sync fabric that I have access to, or did I have access to a user? There are some tools that you can use to improve that. Another question is really, who am I actually verifying, right? On enrollment, you probably want to do strong ID proofing, so that you know the user that actually registers their biometrics with the key is the user that you think it is, right? And biometrics can also be changed after the fact. Now, coming to assuming breach, token theft, that's pretty much what I already talked about, the session tokens. Generally, it's compromised machines, but it could also be an attacker in the middle if you have a cross-site scripting vulnerability. So after you pretty much authenticate the user and issue a session, and you have to assume that that session might get stolen. One thing is you monitor for anomalies, right? If a user is moving geolocations very quickly, that's generally a sign that the session token was stolen, and you can adopt DBSC or DPOP, which means that's pretty much device-bound session credentials. You can at any time pretty much ask the browser again, can you prove that you're still running on the same device, because it's cryptographically bound to the machine. Now, talking about a malicious or compromised authenticator, attestations work well, but you have limited controls without. That's also something that's ongoing right now that's going to get better. And in most cases, you probably, in enterprise, you need an integration with your endpoint protection or with endpoint protection solutions. You also can have malicious, or sometimes it's just careless insiders, right? Users that don't like your security controls, they think they get in their way of productivity. And so you have to limit the possible abuse. And again, you're probably running endpoint protection solutions on those devices. And I think all of them will have analytics and telemetry. You have to see what's going on, track the usage. And then limiting impact. That's actually another thing where FIDO can help you a lot. Because to the FIDO experience, as we already saw, it's much faster, so you can actually step up more frequently. You can make the session lifetimes pretty short, and that means if something is stolen, like the session token is stolen, it's only useful for a few minutes, half an hour, depending on your session lifetime. And that means also you can keep verifying that, because you can keep stepping up. If you have a critical operation, you step up right then, right? You don't wait for the session to expire. Crypto agility is interesting when it comes to pretty much assuming breach and hostile endpoint. That means if a user is compromised, an authenticator is compromised, you probably want to roll the keys. This is possible with FIDO, but it's somewhat complex because it needs like an orchestration between the RP, the relying party, and the authenticator itself. Probably also needs user interaction. So it's maybe something that you should try out, how that could work, so you're ready in the case you need it. And then there's onboarding and recovery. I had that on an earlier slide, didn't mention it at that point, but that is still one of the weaker spots, right? We're securing authentication. Attackers will move where it's easier to attack. One is token theft, right, if you're running on the machine, or you're really targeting the onboarding and recovery process. So you want to make sure that your onboarding and recovery is also phishing resistant, right? You can't use like phishable credentials to enroll a phishing resistant authenticator. One way to do that is you provide backup authenticators that are phishing resistant. It could be security keys. They might not use them every day, but at least when they need them, they're ready. You can go phishing resistant through day 0. There's like new solutions coming out or already available where you can pre-enroll your authenticators. They are bound to a user. And then the user just has to go through a small gesture to activate them, so you're still proving that's the right user. And you want to integrate ID proofing into the process, right? Especially on onboarding and recovery. That's important because you're binding those credentials to the biometrics, and you want to make sure at that point it's the right user. Now, I have this somewhat, it's not the greatest graphic, but it's kind of like what Zero Trust is to me. I also changed it a little bit compared to others. So there's 5 main pillars, which is like identities. In some cases, that really is just users. I think identities is more important. That's what we're doing. And the next one is endpoints. So Arthur mentioned that devices. I think devices should have identities. So it's for me, it's in the first pillar. You have a network, which is your perimeter, your infrastructure, and then you have a resources, which is pretty much the apps and the data that you're accessing. And there's like 3 more horizontal kind of areas. One is analytics and visibility that mostly spans about everything, but more in identities and endpoints. And then you have governance, right? Who has access at what time? You do it dynamically. It's like privileged access management, all that stuff. Identities and resources are covered mostly. And you have orchestration. It's your automation. Now, how does FIDO look today? We're really mostly in the identity space because FIDO is really good at user identity. And to me, there's a little bit more identities, but that's pretty much it. Now, with that, I want to go and do some forward-looking, or look at some things that are coming in the future. The first thing is passkey provider contextual signals. That's a mouthful. And that's actually there's a session going on right now talking about it. So the reason why this is important, it's pretty much, today we have really limited signals especially from syncable passkeys, right? You're losing the attestations. You not really have no information about where the passkey is coming from, how it was shared. And in the best scenario, that's only causing additional step-up and friction, right? Because you don't know if you can trust this device. You don't know if that passkey has been seen before on that device. You just step up all the time. It's not great, but in many scenarios, that uncertainty that you have actually blocks the adoption because, the companies think, without any of the signal, they can use them at all, which is not really true. The next one is, what I then want to talk about is what is actually happening or what's done. We want to provide signals on passkey provenance when you're using passkeys. And the main goal here is it's targeted to high assurance consumer services, right? But there's no reason why that wouldn't be beneficial to enterprises as well. And the way it's done, or the goal really is you want to identify known devices, or at least known device networks, so that you know this passkey is coming from my known device network, it's definitely bound to that known device network, and I trust it, right? So at that point, I don't have to step up anymore. You will also want to be able to identify how and if credentials were shared. And based on that, you can then adjust your assurance levels. Now, this topic is one that I'm the most excited about. I showed the numbers before. We have like more than 2.5 times growth year over year for phishing-resistant factor validations. What I kind of omitted there is a lot of that is coming from the managed passkey providers or managed authenticators. And with the third-party passkey providers becoming available on our platforms. Microsoft just showed it this week. Mobile is already ahead there. Now you can actually integrate those authenticators directly with FIDO. Without them, I think the growth that we're having is like 8% year over year. So this is really like one of the main drivers of growth in the enterprise. The why, we already talked about zero trust. Device context is crucial to really implement zero trust, and those can actually give you that. And IT admins also want to control how key material is created, how it's shared. So the what, how it actually works is it's single party, which means like the ISV, the internet service provider, provides both the authenticator and the backend that it talks to. So it's pretty much the RP and the authenticator in one. And you integrate with that solution. And that actually gives you that you can work around, or not work around, the privacy principle that you generally have, that authenticators should not be tracked across domains, doesn't apply, right? Because it's single party. There's no tracking happening except in that little bubble that you're in. And how it actually works is you have an application running on the machine that integrates as a third-party passkey provider with the operating system. Now that it's running on the operating system, it either deeply integrates with the operating system itself, but it can also integrate with other XDR solutions you're already running on the machine. And then as part of each authentication, and even asynchronously without an authentication, it can send signals to your backend and you can react to it. Additionally, yes, you can control the enrollment process, right? You might not be bound to driving it through the browser directly, and which might make a rollout in enterprise much easier. And the last piece I want to talk about is continuous authentication. So we talked about the always verify piece, but you also want to keep verifying. Again, it's important for zero trust. And because if you implement that right, or if you can implement it, we already said, today you have to kind of decrease the session lifetime to get that always verify, and it's not really always, it's just on a time interval. If you do a continuous authentication, then you can actually increase the lifetime of those sessions again, and you do not have the need for those frequent step-ups. What it actually does is you're collecting posture changes in real time post-authentication. So that means anytime anything changes, you get feedback. And once you get that feedback, you can reevaluate the policy decisions that you made when you gave access. And if it now results in a deny, you can either decide, okay, I have to do another step up on the next call, or I can actually completely revoke the session and start from scratch. There's two frameworks. I think if you were at the keynotes before, you heard one of them, the shared signals framework. That's pretty much an OpenID standard that allows it, or makes it easier to share signals between internet service providers. That works for the user context, so you can pretty much use that today. If something changes, or if one of your providers notices something changed about your user, it gets propagated to all the other consumers, and then they can make decisions based on that. Obviously, again, a lot of the posture changes might be related to devices, so it gets better with device context. And the other one is universal logout. One thing I think that the industry has solved pretty well is like the single sign-on, right? We sign on and are signed in everywhere. And revocation is a little harder. Today, it's somewhat easy for the IDP itself to revoke its own session because it owns it. But every time you're creating a session downstream with another service provider, they create their own session token. It makes it a lot harder to revoke that. So universal logout intends to solve that, as if depending on who you're using. There's already some solutions that support some applications. The goal for the future would be that you have all. And the idea then is once you get a posture change that tells you there's definitely a compromise there's something happened to the user or the device, you just lock them out everywhere and they have to start from scratch. So with that, this again, but the idea would be that FIDO can actually, and the ecosystem that comes with FIDO can cover a lot more of the identities and go even more into the endpoint space. That's more forward-looking. With that, we're pretty close to the end. Want to leave you with a quick summary. So implementing zero trust and even just implementing phishing resistance end-to-end, it's not trivial. We're aware. We're trying to make it easier, especially with the new developments coming. It should get easier for a lot of you. And then lastly, I want to say it's really time to stop using passwords now. I think there's no reason not to get started, right? If you're using password as the first factor, there's no reason any passkey wouldn't be better. And that's it. Thank you.
Get a mic back on. A couple questions. Am I on? Yeah. So thank you. We have a couple questions from the audience. So first one, can you talk a bit more about integrating ID proofing into the process to limit impact, and what kind of ID proofing solutions does Okta support?
Okay, so Okta, I think that's going right now. I'm at the wrong conference, or you are at the wrong conference? Yeah. No, there's actually, yeah, Okta will support ID proofing. I think other companies will support ID proofing as well. I think that's a third-party based approach. I think it's not that a lot of the companies will implement or take a dependency on other solutions and integrate it directly into their enrollment process.
So I could proof someone with a third-party solution that rolls into your zero trust.
Yes, and yeah, mainly directly on enrollment of authenticators initially, and then probably directly on authentication as well. I think if you look at Octane, you will see the providers that are supported.
Okay. Next year, by the way, Octane will not overlap with Authenticate.
Good.
We have this down on record. Last question for you. Does Okta offer certificate-based phishing-resistant authentication in addition to WebAuthn-based?
I mean, Okta supports PIVCAC, which is certificate-based, for example. There's other MTLS solution. You can have, I think there's a device posture integration where you can bring your own, and a lot of customers actually do that. They have their homegrown MTLS solution. We just redirect to them. They come back with claims about the device, and then we do the rest, and you can use your FIDO authenticator, for example, to authenticate the user.
Super. That's all we have time for, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.